Hey guys and girls, welcome back to BBR Suspension. So today we are going to get cracking with one of the final stages of the 1963 Porsche 904 suspension, and we're going to get everything welded together. So I've done a couple of little bits and pieces off camera. I've made up some little bushings in aluminium which will hold the pivot bushes. They basically slide inside the pivot bushes, and then I've made a standoff which slides into the spherical bearing holder, and that will basically get the height set to the center line of the actual tubing, and everything then basically clamps together or bolts together, and we clamp the tubing in place. So we'll start by basically tacking everything or sort of as many tacks as we can get in on the bottom tubing, and then we'll flip it over. So the idea is that these arms are actually symmetrical, whether they top to bottom, upside, or bottom to top, top to bottom, upside down, they are symmetrical. So what we'll do is we'll tack as many spots as we can, then we'll flip it over, we'll tack a couple more places, and then we'll weld. And then what we'll do is, once we've done that, there is still another little cross tube that comes in on the bottom arms, but it's going to be easier to weld into the corners before we put the cross tubing in. So what I'll do is I'll only put the cross tubing in right at the end. So for now we'll get started tacking everything together, and like I say, then we'll weld it up. And what I'll do is I'll probably do one bottom arm and then let it cool off, and maybe do one top arm. I'll just see how long it takes to cool. One other thing that you'll see me do is, on the tubing, once we've got everything tapped, I'm going to drill on each tube a little vent hole. Now that's quite an important step, because what happens is the air that sits inside the tubing, when you're welding and it gets hot, it obviously expands. It's Boyle's law. So what will happen is our temperature is increasing, our pressure is increasing, the volume can't change. So what's going to happen is it's going to try to change the volume, but being in an enclosed space, it's going to push out. So if we don't drill a vent hole, then while we're welding, it's got a tendency to blow. And we don't want that, because obviously we'll contaminate the tungsten and we'll just have a nasty looking hole. So once it's all tacked together, I will drill a small vent hole on each tube before we do the final weld, and that'll just allow the air to purge out while we're welding. So that's something, just wanted to explain it before we get cracking. So without further ado, let's get a hood on, let's get some argon flowing, and let's burn some metal. Right guys, so we've got our welding machine set on DC current, DC electrode negative, same as you would weld stainless steel. We're running about 95 amps because these bushings are pretty thick. So what we need to do, we need to get a little bit of heat going in the bushings when we tack them. So what we're going to do, I've got everything clamped up as you can see. We're going to try and get 2 tacks there and there, possibly a third one there, and then tack this side. We've got it adjusted to the correct center height. We'll get those tacked, then we'll flip the jig around and tack this arm into position, and then we can rotate it. So without further ado, let's get going. Right, so we've got that side tacked up nicely. What we're going to do, we're going to basically turn the jig and reclamp everything so we can get that tube clamped, and we'll take 1 or 2 measurements just to make sure everything is symmetrical, and then we can get that side tube clamped in. I have 3D printed these little standoffs which just help to support the tubing, keep everything in place, so they are making life a little bit easier. So what we'll do, we'll flip the jig, turn it slightly so that we can get this side clamped. So the measurement that I'm checking now is from the edge of the, it's basically the edge of the angle of the jig up to the contact point. I'll try and point it with the welding rod up to the contact point where the tubing itself forms the contact on the actual spherical bearing holder. So those are the dimensions I'm checking, and on both sides I've got 296 millimeters, so I'm happy to go. So what we're going to do, we're going to tack this side up quickly, and then we will flip it over. I'll probably do that off camera, and then we should be able to tack the other side in 1 or 2 spots and get it welded. Let's get this side tacked. Right guys, so I have flipped the arm in the jig, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to first get a couple of tacks on the, just on the pivot bushes to the arm, and then I'll weld the center of this and get 1 or 2 tacks there and try and weld as much as I can on the actual spherical bearing holder. But I'll start by just getting a couple of tacks on the actual pivot bushes so that those don't move. I have checked the dimension of the arms, and it is also 296 millimeters, so I'm happy to go ahead. Right guys, so I've got the top arms now set up in the jig, and I'm going to tack the one side, then we will rotate it and clamp the other side, tack that, and then we'll flip it over similarly to what we did on the lower arms.